Well, good morning and welcome to our extraordinary council meeting for Thursday, the 16th of April. This is our new normal. We're doing our meeting by Zoom, and also welcome to those of you who may be watching us and listening to our meeting from your bubble. So welcome. So I declare our meeting open, and first of all we have apologies. At the moment, we have a couple of councillors who have not yet been able to join us, Philson Marsh and Andrew Quarry. They may be able to join us shortly. We'll move through to item 3, which is declarations of interest, and this is asking any of our elected members if you have any declaration or conflict with any of the items on the agenda today that you wish to declare. No? Thank you. So we move straight to the purpose of today's meeting, which is the 4.1, the proposed district plan fees. And this is to receive the submissions on the proposed district planning service fees and charges. And council received 2 submissions, of which we have read those. Those submitters have asked not to speak to those. So we will be receiving and discussing those submissions. And to do that, I'm going to hand over to Carol and Shane. If you could take us through those proposals, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'll hand over to Carol, who wrote the report, but just a reminder that this is a statutory process under the RMA that we had to go through. And the consultation. So I'll hand over to Carol to speak to the submissions and what she wrote in the report.
Okay, so we've obviously read my officer submission in the report. So the first submission was around not having lodgement fees, which were the list that went out with the consultation. So we've decided, I mean, that this was a bit of a timing issue because we were implementing the electronic system and we were having a bit of a battle with how we deal with fees with the new system. But following further planning and consideration, we've decided to maintain the lodgement fees as per the schedule. But what will change is our internal process for invoicing. So the lodgement fees will remain, but in terms of when this is payable, it will be at the point of the decision of the consent, which means there's only one invoicing process in the system, which made it a lot simpler for everybody in the system. So that's basically the outcome of that submission, and that the fees will remain as they were, so that consultants like GeoWorks will be able to provide estimates, but obviously it's still dependent on the length of time it takes to process a consent, and that is often dependent on the quality of the application. So I've just made a note there that obviously to keep costs to a minimum, we expect to get complete and robust applications coming in. So that's the first officer response. Is there any question around that one?
Thanks, Carol. Is there any questions, comments in relation to that submission 1? Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, everyone. I just have a question in regards to 3.10, and I'll just read from another screen if you don't mind. It's noted from officers' experience the applications have become more complex over the last 2 years and not often complete, leading to longer processing times. I note that the council officer has touched on incomplete forms, but is there any front footing in regards to education of applicants in this area? One is that they may not know, and 2 is that are we able to intercept them at the front of house or at the start of the application? I think I probably know the answer already, but I just want to put that out there.
Yep, thanks, Shane. Yes, we've tried to front foot this for a long time. So we have communicated by email and through the developers interest group meeting and other formats as well to try and put this point across to make sure that those applications are more robust when they come in. Unfortunately, sometimes it's to do with the competence in the external industry, to be quite blunt. So some of those maybe that's not possible, especially if they've got graduates working and they're not being mentored in the organisation. So often we have to end up doing a lot of that education, but unfortunately it's through a consent process, which is costing the applicant money. So there's that side of things. So yes, we have tried a lot to get this improved, but we can't control it. So
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Phil Marsh has joined me here. Welcome, Phil. 8:30. Right, so thank you for that explanation. Is there anyone? Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Morena koutou, everyone. Just want to acknowledge actually initially the fact that we've received some submissions on this process. Really exciting from my perspective. You know, we make the best decisions when we have the collective wisdom of the community contributing to the decisions. So just want to acknowledge the people that have taken the time to share their feedback. My question, Carol, is probably picking up on Councillor Casey's observation about applications becoming more complex over the last 2 years. And in section 3.5 of your report, you talk about consideration of the internal processes and implementation of the new resource consent system. What I'm interested in is, did the financial modelling assumptions behind the lodgement fee get reviewed and considered as part of that? Later in the report, you talk about just adding on an inflationary adjustment. But just given the changing nature, I was just keen to explore whether there was a need to review in more depth whether that initial fee is still an accurate reflection of cost incurred.
well, it's too early to say at this point. That's something we would review and monitor going forward with the new system. So from our experience with the building consent electronic system that was implemented, the actual technical processing time remains the same. It's the same process, it's the same mental, analysis of the application that needs to happen. That doesn't shorten. The main thing that happens to be a benefit in these types of systems is the administration function. So the not making up of hard copy files, all that sort of work. So that's generally a smaller proportion of the time. So we're very reluctant to jump in and reduce all those fees before we know it can actually cover the costs. So what we'd like to do, which for the building consent fees as well, is just to monitor that once we've got the system in and running for a while, and then review them perhaps in a year's time.
Thank you. Councillor Councillor Humphrey, you wanted to continue that?
No, I was just saying thank you, and I'm going to mute myself again.
Great, thank you. Councillor Short.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Carol, what's the funding split in this fee? As in private versus public? Is it largely covered by the private component, or is there a little bit of general ratepayer contribution to this particular fee?
I think for the planning area, from memory, it's about the 70-30. It's slightly different for the building area, a 60-40 in the building area. So yeah.
I guess where I'm going with that is, if we don't get it right initially, there will be a little bit of general ratepayer uptake on the difference.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. Carol, I think the main point of the submission seems to me to be the fact that the charge is based on an hourly rate, and I just note the when there's an hourly rate, it just seems to me there's it doesn't relate to the value to the person applying, and I think that's where they're coming from. I know in our industry in accountancy we're getting some pressure not to use hourly rate for billing purposes because of that fact that it doesn't equate to value at all. and there's various issues with hourly rates that different applicants can be charged different amounts of fees for pretty much a similar amount of work, even though one job may have taken a bit longer than the other for whatever reason. So did you give consideration to just having a fixed fee rather than an hourly rate basis for billing here?
No, and the submission 2 talks more to that point. Fixed fees are very difficult. Resource consenting is subjective process, obviously, and obviously each case is different. So it's a case-by-case basis, and there's no other way other than really charging an hourly rate. And each hourly rate will be different depending on the competency of the planner. So there are different rates for a graduate, a planner, a senior planner, and a planning principal. So there are different rates there, but the lodgement fees, to put the fee at a level that we consider it appropriate to have that consent processed in, but it is dependent on the type of consent the application received and the amount of work that goes into them. Sometimes they're done under that fee, but most of the time they actually go over the fee, and that's where the hourly rate triggers, is after the lodgement fee.
Thank you.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor Campbell?
That answers the question, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ford and then Mr. Templer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good morning, everybody. Carol, I'm just, well, interesting. I come from an industry where our fees are commission rather than hourly rate, so that's by the by. My question really is to try and get a feel for if we talk about the total fee that the client pays the council as 100%, let's consider 3 examples, perhaps a very simple resource consent application for a 1-lot subdivision, cutting the front lawn off, and then perhaps a medium complex application, and then a particularly complex application. I'm just trying to get a feel for the percentage that would be lodgement fee, and then the percentage that would be have to be charged on an hourly rate basis. Can you give us some sort of guide? I realise it's a very grey question.
Not off the top of my head, Michael, but I can say, as I've mentioned, that a lot more of the applications are more complex these days, especially subdivisions, which do tend to be taking a lot longer. We're using the extension of time provision in the RMA as well to enable this to happen. But again, like I said before, a lot of it is largely because the applications are not robust enough. And once you get into that scenario, that the time does tick quite a lot. So it's really important that the agents, and obviously the applicants are guided by the agents, to make sure their application covers every aspect that it needs to do in terms of the district plan rules. And what we're finding is they're often not, more often than not. So that's what's taking the time in a lot of cases. But if you wanted exact figures and percentages, I could get our team to try and pull some of that data.
Thank you, Carol. I don't want the team to go to any trouble. It was just, if there was a sort of a ballpark answer, that would have been fine. But that's fine. I'm just supportive of the concept of trying to be as clear as possible, or so that the agents can be as clear as possible to their clients upfront about what the fees are likely to be. And obviously, the more, if it was sort of 90% lodgement fee plus 10% hourly rate, well, that's fairly straightforward. But if it was the other way around, it's which it just about could be, I think, with a more complex one, then that makes it pretty difficult for decision making.
Yeah, for simple land use consent applications, I would say they're mostly done within the lodgement fee, but subdivisions are a whole different ballgame.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Hand over to Dr. Templer.
Good morning, everyone. One of the reasons we've gone with the hourly rate is to refer to Stuart's point. It ensures that consents which take an equal amount of work are charged the same amount of money. And it's also to act as an incentive on our development community. If we had a fixed charge, that would incentivise them to put very substandard applications in, because there's no downside to it. They'd just knock something up and throw it in. And we do see that from the community at times. By charging an hourly rate, we incentivise them to actually get their submission accurate, to take proper account of the district plan, to actually follow the rules, and then we can process it quickly and they pay a small fee. And those that don't do those things suffer a financial penalty. So we're trying to create an incentive in the system for people to put better submissions in. Helen, are you there? Because we seem to have lost you at the moment.
I can hear you, Richard. It's Michael here.
Yeah, I can't see or hear Helen, and she's showing up as both video and sound blanked.
Could I suggest in the interim, provided we still have a quorum, which I'm sure we do, that Michael could take over chairing the discussion? I'm sure there's probably just a technical difficulty, and Helen will be back with us in a moment.
That's fine from my point of view. Thank you, Hilary. Councillor Humphrey, should I say? Right, were there any, the only trouble is I can't see the hands, I don't think. Was it? Just a second, I might be able to. Councillor Short, did you have a question or a comment?
Mute.
Yeah.
Are you there,
No.
Councillor Short?
She's on mute.
On mute, mate.
Sorry, I just hadn't lowered my hand. I'd already asked my question.
All right. Well, perhaps we can, if there are no further questions, please sing out if and you all know my level of technical ability. Perhaps if Carol can carry on with the second comments read and submission.
Okay. Okay, so the response to submission number 2, this was around establishing an instant resource consent type like Palmerston North City do. So you'll note what I've written here as to some reasons why we haven't done that yet. So obviously they're written there, but it's difficult for the application to determine when an encroachment is considered minor. And the plan doesn't easily determine or define the severity of an effect at the moment. And also we've got the issue around written approvals, and that's also difficult for the applicant to determine, and we experience that quite often. So basically, and we certainly again wouldn't consider it for a subdivision consent at all. There's just too many variables in that process to have a sort of fixed fee. And we know that they do take a considerable amount of time, and it wouldn't be appropriate for a ratepayer to cover that. So, well, in our view. And also another point really is that it's dangerous to compare different council fees directly like that. There's too many variables like funding splits, for example, which we just touched on before, but also district plan rules and their interpretation are quite different from council to council. So when we did investigate the Palmerston North City Council instant consent, it actually only applied to a particular type of consent, which was for dwellings that do not comply with separation distance rules for front boundaries or crown land, which is very specific. And it also still required their city networks approval as well. So it's not as great as it sounds, I guess, in terms of what it's trying to achieve. The other point I want to make is that our current plan isn't particularly helpful in initiating instant consent fees like this, because of the nature of the plan at the moment isn't complete, and it doesn't appropriately provide for managing the effects in a way that we can be confident to issue those instant resource consents on a cheaper rate. So until the plan is completed and we're satisfied that we can deal with those consents other than in an instant resource consent type at a level of restricted discretionary, we're not comfortable to initiate those consent fixed fees like that at this point in time. But it's not something that's off the radar. We can review that once we're happy that the district plan permits us to do that sort of consenting.
Thanks very much, Carol. Welcome back, Helen, I think.
Yes, sorry about that. We swapped to the main screen so you could see Phil and Brent, but for some reason it wouldn't work. Okay, so we've discussed submission 1 and 2. Are there any other comments or questions that we want to ask Shane or Carol, or just make in general in relation to this before we look at the recommendations put forward? Are there any of our other councillors who haven't spoken this morning? Is there anything that you would like to question or comment on? Thank you. I see Councillor Quarry's having trouble connecting to the audio.
Ellie's just shared the screen so you can see the resolution.
No.
Thanks, Ellie.
But
No,
now I've got this, so how do I get rid of that?
no, that's Ellie's screen.
She's, no, that's right, she's hearing you. So.
It's your resolution there.
Okay. Okay, so now we have 2 still with their hands up. Councillor Ford, were you wanting to speak?
Just very briefly, so just, I guess, completely accept Carol's explanation of why she's not in favour of supporting the second submission at this stage. But I'm also pleased to see, to hear that I guess that we've got an open mind to reviewing what we might be able to do in this regard as the district plan gets reviewed further. So just to comment that I'm pleased about that aspect of it, because the easier we can make it for the applicants, the better from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I note on page 9, which is the submission from Bill Jamieson, Senior Planner at GeoWorks, that he quotes that, and this is probably really a comment, and maybe the Chief Executive or otherwise could jump in here. He says there, because councils can charge whatever they like, moving to an hourly rate system erodes honesty, trust, and accountability in the system. I would have thought charging an hourly rate would be far more transparent, because you could actually evidence the hourly breakdown or the job breakdown into a per hourly basis. And I think from my own point of view, that would actually make the job more transparent, or the job card anyway, more transparent and probably slightly more efficient, would it not?
Yes, I completely agree with you, Shane.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, comments? If not, then we did have up on the screen, and you'll have in front of you, the 3 recommendations that have been put forward this morning. And Ellie's just putting those up again on the screen so you can see them there. The first one is that we receive those submitters, and then the next 2 relate to a decision around each of those submissions. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those? We can do them individually if that is the preference. So
yeah, happy to move that.
If we go to submission 1.
Yep. Happy to move that.
Thank you. That's Councillor Casey.
Would you like me to move them individually, Your Worship, or should we just go in one batch?
We could try doing them together, unless there is anyone who differs with any of those recommendations. Let's try go through one at a time. And at the moment, I can't see all of you, so please say your name if you are moving or seconding. So Councillor Casey, if we start with recommendation 1.
Very good. Happy to move that the council, this is recommendation number 1, that the council considers and notes the matters raised by submitters on the proposed district planning service fees and charges for the 2020 and 21 year.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that proposal?
I'm happy to second that, Your Worship. Michael here.
Councillor Ford, thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? That motion is carried. Thank you. So we move to recommendation 2. Do I have a mover and a seconder for recommendation 2?
Happy to move that.
Would you like to, Councillor G. Taylor, read that for us?
That the council accepts the submission from GeoWorks Limited and reinstates the lodgement fee basis for notified and limited notified applications and public works designations.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Marsh. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? That motion is carried. And our third recommendation, please, do I have a mover and a seconder?
Happy to move that if no one's available to move that, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
And the third point is that the council declines the submission from Michael Dunham, but notes that once the sectional review of the council's district plan has been completed and made operative, officers could then consider the overall effect of an instant resource consent at the level of restricted discretionary.
Thank you. I have a mover. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Thank you. That's Councillor Hadfield. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? That motion is carried. Thank you. So those 3 motions have been passed as the recommendations were put. So thank you.